Her name was Ashley Marie Collins, and for 6 years, every single Saturday morning from the time she was 9 years old until she was 15, she woke up before sunrise, put on her oldest clothes, drove with her father in silence down Route 9 through the flat Ohio farmland, and walked into a house that never once felt like it wanted her there. She scrubbed the bathrooms. She mopped the kitchen floor on her hands and knees. She folded laundry that smelled like another woman's perfume. She cooked dinner for a family she was never fully invited into. And every single Saturday evening, she climbed back into her father's truck, rode home in the same silence, and told herself that this was what love looked like when you had to earn it. She was 9 years old when she started believing that. She was 24 years old when she found out she had been lied to about all of it. This is her story, and I need you to stay with me until the end, because the ending is the part that changes everything. Ashley was 7 years old when her parents divorced, and she understood almost none of it except that her mother cried in the bathroom with the door closed and her father started keeping his shoes by the front door like he was always ready to leave. Her parents, Greg and Donna Collins, had met in high school in Dayton, Ohio, married young the way people did in that part of the state, and built a modest but stable life in a 2-bedroom house on Crestview Lane with a yard that needed mowing and a furnace that rattled every winter. Greg worked for a regional logistics company called Midwest Freight, driving a desk job that paid steady if not spectacular money. Donna was a dental hygienist. They were not unhappy people individually. They were just two people who had grown in opposite directions so slowly that neither of them noticed until the distance was too wide to cross. The divorce was not dramatic. There were no screaming matches that Ashley could remember, no thrown dishes, no police called to the house. It was quieter than that and somehow worse for the quietness. Her father moved into an apartment on the other side of town. Ashley stayed with her mother on Crestview Lane. Every other weekend she went to her dad's apartment, which smelled like microwave meals and the cedar air freshener he kept in the bathroom, and they would watch movies or go to Applebee's and her father would ask her how school was going and she would say fine and he would nod and they would both pretend that fine meant something. She loved her father deeply and completely the way only a child who is slightly afraid of losing someone can love them, with a desperate, careful, quiet love that never quite knew how to say itself out loud. And Greg loved Ashley too, in his own way, in the way that men of his generation sometimes loved their children, at a slight emotional distance, through acts of provision rather than words, through showing up rather than opening up. He showed up. She will give him that. He always showed up. The trouble began the year Ashley turned 8, when Greg met Linda. Linda Hargrove was 36 years old when she walked into Greg's life at a company barbecue hosted by one of his colleagues. She was pretty in a sharp, deliberate way, highlighted hair, fitted blouse, a laugh that arrived just slightly too quickly at everything Greg said. She had been married once before to a man named Dale who had left her with a house outside of Beaver Creek in a bitterness she wore so naturally that most people mistook it for confidence. She had no children of her own and made it clear early on that she had no particular desire for any. Greg found her impressive. She found Greg useful. Neither of them would have described it that way, but that is what it was. They dated for 8 months. Greg proposed on New Year's Eve with a ring he had quietly financed through his credit union. Linda said yes before he finished the sentence. Ashley found out about the engagement from her mother, who heard it from a mutual friend, which told Ashley everything she needed to know about where she ranked in the new order of her father's life. She was 8.5 years old and she had already learned to make herself smaller so there would be less of her to disappoint. Linda's house. And it was always Linda's house, never their house, never a place where Ashley's drawings went on the refrigerator or her shoes belonged by the door, was a 4-bedroom colonial in Beaver Creek that Linda had kept in the divorce from Dale. It was a genuinely nice house. Cream-colored siding, a 2-car garage, a kitchen with granite countertops that Linda kept spotless in a way that felt less like cleanliness and more like control. The first time Ashley visited, she was 9 years old and she stood in the foyer with her overnight bag and tried to smile and Linda looked at her the way you look at a piece of furniture you didn't choose but have decided to tolerate. "You can put your bag in the guest room," Linda said. "Not the room. The guest room." The distinction was deliberate and Ashley, even at 9, felt it land. Greg didn't notice. Greg rarely noticed the things Linda communicated through tone and word choice rather than volume. He was a straightforward man who took people at face value and believed that if something was wrong, someone would say so directly. Linda understood this about him and used it like a tool. The arrangement that began that first year was presented to Ashley as an opportunity. Her father sat her down one Friday evening. Ashley remembered it was Friday because she had been looking forward to the weekend, and the conversation rearranged everything, and explained that he and Linda had been talking, and they thought it would be wonderful if Ashley came over every Saturday to spend time at the house, to help out a little, to be part of the family. Ashley was 9. She heard, "be part of the family," and said yes immediately, because being part of the family was the thing she wanted most in the world. What she did not understand then, what she would not understand for another 15 years, was that, "help out a little," was doing a great deal of work in that sentence. The first Saturday she arrived at 7 in the morning and Linda handed her a list. It was handwritten in Linda's neat, looping script on a yellow legal pad. The list had 11 items. Vacuum all upstairs carpets. Mop the kitchen and both bathrooms. Wipe down all baseboards. Clean the stovetop. Scrub both bathroom sinks and toilets. Dust the living room furniture. Do the laundry. Wash, dry, fold, and put away. Clean the sliding glass door. Sweep the back porch. Empty all the trash cans. Tidy the garage. Ashley looked at the list. She looked at Linda. She looked at her father, who was standing by the coffee maker reading something on his phone. She was 9 years old. She picked up the vacuum. She did not know what else to do. And Linda settled into the chair on the back porch with a glass of iced tea and a magazine and did not get up again until lunch. This is how it went every Saturday for 6 years. Greg Collins was not a negligent father. This is important to understand because the story could be easier if he were the kind of man who simply didn't care, who turned away from his daughter's labor with indifference. But Greg was not that man. He was a man who was in love, who trusted his wife completely, and who had been told a story so consistently and so calmly that he had never once thought to question it. The story Linda told him was simple. She told Greg that Ashley was being paid for her help. Every week, Greg transferred $50 into Linda's personal checking account, the same account Linda had kept from before their marriage, the account Greg had no direct access to, with the understanding that Linda would give that money to Ashley as a weekly allowance for her work around the house. $50 a week. For 6 years. That is $200 a month. That is $2,400 a year. That is $14,400 over the full 6 years, minus the weeks Ashley missed for illness or school events or the 2 summers her mother took her to visit relatives in Tennessee. Conservatively, even accounting for missed Saturdays, Linda Hargrove collected somewhere between $13,000 and $15,000 from her husband over 6 years, looked her stepdaughter in the face every single Saturday, watched that child scrub her floors and clean her toilets and fold her laundry, and kept every single penny. Ashley never saw a dollar. Not one. And because Ashley believed that the arrangement was simply unpaid, because her father had never directly told her about the allowance, because he assumed Linda was handling it, because he was the kind of man who delegated domestic details to his wife, Ashley grew up believing something far more damaging than the truth. She grew up believing her labor wasn't worth paying for. She grew up believing that this was simply the price of being allowed into her father's new life. She worked harder every Saturday, trying to earn something that had already been stolen from her before she ever had the chance to receive it. There were moments, small moments she mostly pushed away, when something felt wrong. Once, when she was 12, she heard Linda on the phone with someone, laughing about the little maid, and felt a cold drop of something in her stomach that she didn't have a name for yet. Once, when she was 13, she asked her father awkwardly if he thought she was doing a good job helping out, and he said, "Of course, Linda says you're a great help," and the way he said it, proud, relieved, grateful, made Ashley feel even more confused, because if she was doing such a good job, why did Linda always find something to criticize? Why were the baseboards never clean enough, the folding never neat enough, the mopping never thorough enough. She decided the answer was that she simply wasn't good enough. She was a child. That is what children decide when adults fail them. They turn the failure inward and carry it like it belongs to them. When Ashley turned 15, the Saturday visits quietly stopped. There was no formal conversation about it. Her mother had taken a new job and needed Ashley to help more at home on weekends. Her school schedule was getting busier. She had joined the cross-country team and practices sometimes ran into Saturday mornings. Linda did not fight to keep the arrangement going, which told Ashley something she filed away without examining. She was relieved to stop going. She told herself it was because she was getting older and had her own life now, and that was true, but underneath it was also the simpler truth that she had never once felt welcome in that house, had never once felt like a daughter there, had felt instead like a service being provided. She graduated high school, moved to Columbus for college on a partial academic scholarship, worked part-time at a campus coffee shop, and built a life that was genuinely hers for the first time. She studied accounting. She was good with numbers, precise and methodical, which her professors said was a gift, and graduated at 22 with a job offer from a mid-sized firm in Columbus. She saw her father at holidays. Their relationship was warm but surfaced, like a lake that looks still because the depth is too cold to swim in. Linda came to holidays too, perfectly pleasant in public, and Ashley was perfectly pleasant back, and both of them understood that pleasantness was the agreement they had silently made. Ashley did not hate Linda by this point. She had released most of what she felt into a quiet resignation, a sense that this was simply how things were, that her childhood had been what it had been, that no one was going to apologize and she was not going to demand that they did. She was 24 years old, living in a nice apartment in Columbus, doing well at her job, dating a man named Chris who made her laugh for the first time in years, and she had decided, as functional adults sometimes must, to let the past be the past. And then came Thanksgiving. It was a Wednesday evening the week of Thanksgiving and Ashley was sitting at the kitchen table at her mother's house on Crestview Lane. Donna had kept the house, had repainted it a warm yellow, had filled it with plants and books and a rescue dog named Biscuit who treated every human as a long-lost friend, and Ashley was helping her mother prep the green bean casserole when she said, completely casually, completely without agenda, the thing that cracked the last 15 years open like a fault line. She said, "You know, Mom, I never minded working over at Linda's all those Saturdays. I was never paid or anything, but at least it made me feel like I was doing something useful." Her mother stopped stirring. Very slowly, Donna Collins set down the wooden spoon, turned to look at her daughter, and said, "What do you mean you were never paid?" Ashley looked up from the green beans. "Dad never paid me. I mean, I wasn't expecting it, Ashley." Her mother's voice was very quiet. "Your father told me, more than once, that he was giving Linda money every week specifically to pay you an allowance. He told me it was $50 a week. He was very specific about it because I told him once I thought you should be compensated and he said he was already handling it." The kitchen was very quiet. The dog looked up from his bed in the corner. Ashley sat with what her mother had just said and felt something shift inside her chest. Not pain exactly, not yet, more like the sensation of a floor that you thought was solid revealing that it had been hollow the whole time. She drove to her father's house the next morning. She did not call ahead. She pulled into the driveway at 9 a.m. and Greg answered the door in his robe holding a mug of coffee, and his face when he saw her expression, before she said a single word, told her that somewhere in him, some part of him already knew something was wrong. She sat across from him at his kitchen table. Linda was upstairs, and Ashley said, very calmly, "Dad, did you pay Linda money every week to give to me as an allowance when I was coming over on Saturdays?" And Greg Collins set down his mug and said, "Yes. Every week. $50. For 6 years." And then the silence came. 4 seconds. 5, 6. "Dad," Ashley said, "I never received a single dollar." The color left his face so completely and so suddenly that she thought for a moment he might faint. He did not faint. He stood up very slowly, walked to the bottom of the stairs, and called Linda's name in a voice Ashley had never heard her father use before, flat and very controlled and very, very quiet. Linda came downstairs in her robe with her reading glasses still on and the expression of a woman who had been called to account and had decided her best strategy was still confidence. She looked at Ashley. She looked at Greg. She said, "I can explain." And she did explain, or rather, she attempted to, cycling through 3 different versions of the explanation in the space of about 4 minutes. First she said she had given Ashley the money in cash and Ashley must not be remembering correctly. When Greg pointed out that Ashley had never once mentioned receiving any money, not once in 15 years, and that he found it difficult to believe a child would not mention receiving a $50 weekly allowance, Linda moved to version 2. She said the money had been saved in an account for Ashley, a kind of college fund she had been quietly building, and she had simply never gotten around to telling anyone. When Greg asked her to show him the account, a silence entered the room that lasted long enough to be its own answer. The third version was the most honest and the most devastating. Linda said the money had been absorbed into household expenses over the years, that running the house cost more than Greg realized, that she had always meant to pay Ashley directly but the finances had gotten complicated and time had passed and she had told herself she would make it right eventually and eventually had never come. Ashley sat and listened to all 3 versions and felt something very strange, not rage, not tears, not the explosive emotional release that the situation perhaps warranted. She felt clear, cleaner than she had felt in years. Like a window being wiped from the inside. She looked at Linda and said, "How much do you think it was total?" And Linda said nothing. Ashley said, $50 a week, roughly 48 weeks a year, 6 years. That's approximately $14,400. Give or take. She pulled out her phone. She opened her notes app. She began writing down dates. Greg watched his daughter do this with an expression that Ashley would describe later as a man watching himself wake up from a very long dream. Linda went back upstairs. Greg sat at the kitchen table for a long time after Ashley left and did not move. Ashley called her father's brother, her Uncle David, a CPA in Cincinnati who had always been the sharpest person in the family with numbers and had never particularly liked Linda, and explained everything. David asked 3 questions, said, "Send me everything you remember," and called back 4 hours later with a figure. Accounting for all documented transfers from Greg's account to Linda's personal account over the relevant 6-year period, the total was $15,600. He also pointed out quietly that depending on the state, this could constitute financial fraud within a marriage, and that Greg should speak to a family attorney. Greg did speak to a family attorney. The attorney confirmed that what Linda had done, representing to her spouse that money was being used for one purpose while diverting it entirely for her own use, was a form of marital financial deception that had implications for any potential divorce settlement. Greg filed for divorce 4 months after Thanksgiving. In the settlement, the attorney ensured that the $15,600 was factored into the division of marital assets in Ashley's favor, structured as a direct payment to Ashley from Linda's share of the settlement. Linda's attorney contested it. The documentation of 6 years of transfers with Greg's stated purpose in the memo lines made the contest short-lived. Ashley received a check. It was not about the money by then. She had a good job, she was fine financially, she did not need it the way she would have needed it as a child. But she deposited it into her savings account and sat with it for a long time, thinking about the 9-year-old girl who picked up that vacuum because she wanted to be part of a family, who worked every Saturday for 6 years and never once questioned whether she deserved to be paid because she had already decided she wasn't worth very much. She thought about that girl for a long time. And then she called her mother. And then she called Chris. And then she took Biscuit for a very long walk along the Scioto River on a cold Ohio afternoon with the flat gray sky pressing down on everything, and she cried. Not with anger, not even with grief exactly, but with the particular release that comes from finally, after a very long time, understanding the whole true shape of a thing that hurt you. Ashley Collins is 26 years old now. She still lives in Columbus. She and Chris got engaged last spring at a small Italian restaurant on High Street and she called her father to tell him before she posted anything online, which tells you something about where that relationship has found its way to. Not perfect, not without the weight of everything that happened, but honest now in a way it never quite was before. Greg is in therapy. He says it himself, without embarrassment, which Ashley thinks is the bravest thing he has ever done. Linda lives in the Beaver Creek house. She kept it in the divorce, and Ashley does not know much about her life now and finds, to her own surprise, that she does not particularly need to. The anger burned clean and left something quieter behind. What Ashley says, when she talks about all of it, and she doesn't talk about it often, but when she does she is direct and precise the way accountants sometimes are. What she says is this: the most expensive thing Linda stole was not the money. The money was recoverable. What was harder to recover was the years Ashley spent believing she was not worth paying. That is the part that took the longest to unlearn. That is the part she is still, on some Saturday mornings, working on. But she is working on it. And that, she will tell you, is everything.